Good Wednesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Browns will get training camp underway in a little over 2 weeks. Closing in, getting ready for that Hall of Fame game. Along those lines, answers to the biggest questions facing each of the teams in 2023. This from the Bleacher Report. How rusty is Deshaun Watson for his first full season as a Brown? The answer, with a focus back on football entirely, look for him to help the Browns go toe-to-toe with the Bengals in the AFC North in 2023. He should be back, is the answer. With that, let's welcome in Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dawgs podcast, as well as Network 216. Tyler, I think that's fair. I think there were a lot of things that we tend to overlook about Watson's play in those 6 games last year.
Yeah, Dave, a lot of what we overlook too is just kind of that toll, that mental toll that it takes on you as a person, regardless if you're an athlete, whoever you are, just to go through everything that Watson had to deal with last year and try and focus on football. Just very difficult to do, especially trying to learn a new offense at the exact same time. And that was always going to be really difficult for him. And even though, he didn't look like fantastic, he still had more touchdowns than interceptions, which is encouraging. Overall, at the end of the year, you started to see him have glimpses of that player that we saw before the suspension, before being off for basically 2 years. And I think we're really going to see that in 2023. We're going to see a guy that's going to look a lot more comfortable. I'm really hoping, even though Kevin Stefanski hasn't done it in the past much with starters, I do hope that we see Watson more than just the 4th preseason game, give him at least a series, maybe in the 2nd or 3rd game, just to, again, get his feet wet in the offense this year. But we're all expecting Deshaun Watson to bounce back this year. I don't think he's going to be rusty. I really don't. Maybe week 1, just because, sometimes some of these guys are rusty, especially if you don't even see any time in the preseason. But I'm very confident Deshaun Watson's going to bounce back this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. And if he does, this roster has been built out around him without question. Evidence of that, Pro Football Focus tweets out best positional group rankings in the AFC. And for the Browns, there's 2 of them that they are. The best running backs, Nick Chubb, and the best offensive line. You see Bengals receiving core, Dolphins defensive line, linebacking unit, Ravens secondary, the Jets. But the Browns, the only team with 2 positional groups. And the running back group is the Nick Chubb group. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah, when it comes to running backs, that's solely based on what they're saying is Nick Chubb pretty much is the best running back in the league, is what I'm gathering from that. Because outside that, you got Jerome Ford, and then you have Demetric Felton and John Kelly. That's what you have right now if you're the Browns. Nick Chubb, they're proving is the best running back in the league. And so I love seeing that from the running back group. I also think maybe they believe a little bit in Jerome Ford. I think that's kind of encouraging to see. But then if you look at the offensive line, to me, that one is for sure a no-brainer because there's just so much talent on that offensive line. Joe Bitonio, Pro Bowler pretty much every year of his career. Wyatt Teller's been a Pro Bowler in multiple seasons. Ethan Posick, I believe if he wasn't injured, he probably would have made his first Pro Bowl this past year, just given how productive he was and how well he performed on a 1-year contract. Jack Conklin has proven he's been an all-pro player when he's been healthy. Obviously, health is the biggest question mark with him. And, of course, Jed Wills has been inconsistent. But from time to time, we have seen some flashes. And then you just look at the depth the Browns have on the offensive line. You bring in DeJuan Jones, who can play right tackle. They've been mixing him around at left tackle as well, seeing if he can be a swing tackle for him. James Hudson's still a young player that has some potential. Drew Forbes, Michael Dunn, either Nick Harris or Luke Whippler. So there's also talent along the offensive line outside of just the starters. And so the Browns being number 1 on the offensive line for sure makes the most sense. Running back was a little bit of a surprise for me, but like you said, that's mainly because they believe clearly that Nick Chubb is the best running back in the NFL.
Without question. And this is from Dog Pound Daily. 3 big questions for the Browns running back situation in 2023. Number 1, who will be number 2 back? Number 2 is Demetric Felton battling Elijah Moore for the RB3 role. And number 3, will the Browns bring in a free agent running back? Tyler, I don't think there's much of a question that season is going to start with Jerome Ford as number 2. And Elijah Moore, he's going to be kind of a Deebo Samuel. I don't think they're giving him as much touches as Deebo Samuel. What you're doing by lining him up in the backfield is you identify who the matchup is. And if it's a mismatch, you exploit it.
Exactly. And that was a really good question about Demetric Felton or Elijah Moore as that running back 3, because Elijah Moore, I think the Browns don't necessarily have that third down back. Some say, well, Nick Chubb can play 3 downs, and maybe they do use him more on third down. Some say Jerome Ford could be that guy. I think that's when they want to try and put Elijah Moore more in the backfield and give them that different look on offense. And if they do look to add anybody at some point, I don't think – I mean, it's going to be a guy probably. It's going to be your third back, maybe possibly a second if you have a guy, for instance, one that comes to mind is if the Falcons, because I still believe it'll happen, end up cutting Cordell Patterson. That's a type of player I think the Browns could be interested in, that Swiss Army knife that can play receiver and play running back. He's up in his 30s, but at the same time, that's a solid backup running back to have to compete with Jerome Ford. But kind of like you said, I want to see how much they use Elijah Moore. We've already seen him line up out of the backfield. He's going to create a lot of mismatches just because he's a fantastic route runner. He doesn't get enough credit for that at all. And if you can line him up out of the backfield, it's just going to give teams another thing they're going to have to contend with the Browns offense. And there's a lot of talent on this offense. I mean, we've mentioned a lot of it. So if you could put Elijah Moore in that type of position, good luck trying to have a linebacker cover Elijah Moore out of the backfield, because it's just they're not going to be successful. So I really want to see how they use him, because like you mentioned, Deebo Samuel is what I think of too. I know the 49ers, what they like to do is more of Deebo Samuel, like actually running up the middle and whatnot. So I'm curious if not only the Browns use him as a pass catcher out of the backfield, but maybe from time to time to give them that different look. You have Nick Chubb next to Deshaun Watson, then you put Elijah Moore in the backfield, and then you actually give him a couple reps running the ball. So really curious to see how they use him this year, but I think he could end up being the Browns' third down back, depending on how much they like to use him out of the backfield.
All right, before we go to break, take a look at Nick Chubb posting this on Instagram. Working out, not video this time, but he tells you, if you get outworked, you will get outperformed. I refuse to let that happen. Odell Beckham Jr. responded and said, see you soon, brother. So again, Nick Chubb giving you a glimpse, mindset. That's one of the reasons he's been as productive as he's been.
Absolutely. And when you see some of these just videos or posts that Nick Chubb does, because he doesn't post very often. He's not huge on social media, just every now and then he likes to put something out on there. Nick Chubb is just the fact that he can squat as much weight as he can, and just the mentality that he has as a player. You just love to see that, because Nick Chubb is never going to be that vocal guy. That's just not who he is. He lets his play do the talking. I think you always need leaders that lead vocally, but you also need players that perform on the field and let their play do the talking. You need that good mix of both. And that's exactly what Nick Chubb is. And that's why he's a captain for the Browns nearly every single year, because he leads by example. Like, you sometimes wish he would come out and be a little bit more vocal, but at the same time, like those comments, like Nick Chubb says, he's right. If you get outworked, you will get outperformed. And you can tell just by Nick Chubb's regiment every single year, he won't let that happen. And that's why he's consistently one of the top running backs in the league statistically, and arguably the most talented running back in the NFL.
Tyler Johnson and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dogs Podcast, Swells Network 216. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, this is Rico. Can we just take a moment to appreciate our GM, Andrew Berry? I know he has made some mistakes along the way, but what GM hasn't? He is still young and growing into his job. From the outside perspective, he seems to ignore or put limited resources into a certain position group, but then the very next season, he attacks it. I mean, far be it from me to criticize the GM, but like I said, it's just an outside observation from a couch expert like myself. But he seems to get his man when he targets them in free agency or trades. Also, him being one of the extremely few men of color in an executive position, he can build a rapport with players. I mean, that has to count for something. I, for one, am very excited for his continued ascension, and I do think he will help lead this organization and fan base to glory. What are your feelings on Barry? Thanks.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Tyler, I think he is very good. And the other thing, I like the couch expert, by the way, Rico. The other thing that I think is very important, players respond to, more importantly, agents seem to like dealing with him. And that's an underrated part of being a GM. Now, you got to hit on your draft picks, and, you know, we'll see how that goes. Drafting's as important, but agents like dealing with him. That's important in free agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the caller mentioned, I mean, you'll see at time to time Andrew Berry not put many resources in. For instance, defensive tackle last year was a big one. And what did he do this year? That he knew that was a major need, so he went out and got Dalvin Tomlinson. He went out and drafted Siaki Ika. He went out and brought in Maurice Hurst and Tristan Hill. He went out and added 4 defensive tackles. He proved that that was a need to be addressed, and he did it. Some wonder if linebacker is kind of that position this year. Did the Browns do enough because they only brought back their own guys? And time will tell. I personally think he did enough there, but look at the guys that he's brought in. I mean, this year, Juan Thornhill, you bring him in on a very reasonable contract. Ogbo Okwonkwo, you bring him in on a very favorable team contract. Bring in Marquise Goodwin, Rodney McLeod, bring back Anthony Walker, Sione Takitaki for the veteran minimum. Jordan Akins. I mean, look at what Andrew Berry has done. He's consistently finding ways to make the team better with not having the most cap space to do that. The easiest way to create cap space is restructuring contracts, and he's very good at doing that. But if you look at the way he structures deals too, that's something that doesn't get talked about enough for the work that he does there in making it, for instance, like Dalvin Tomlinson this year, making $4 million for your first year salary. Is the way he's structuring these, he's backloading these contracts, and what he does as a general manager, when he backloads those deals, the NFL cap is going to keep progressing every single year, and that's going to not only help the Browns, but when these contracts come in, it's not going to hit the cap as hard because that cap keeps going up, and then he's just able to keep restructuring contracts, which at some point can get a little dicey because you can only kick the can down the road for so long. But then that's when you can give guys contract extensions to push those cap hits back. So look at everything Andrew Berry has done, his body of work. And obviously it's only been one playoff appearance so far. There have been a lot of other circumstances that I think, along with Kevin Stefanski, are the reason the team hasn't made the playoffs the last 2 years. But the work he has done to build this roster since he and Kevin Stefanski have come to Cleveland, it's been remarkable. And I didn't even mention bringing in Zadarius Smith for basically nothing, and trading Amari Cooper last year for nothing, and bringing in Elijah Moore, who some believe could end up being the Browns' leading receiver as far as receptions this year. So Andrew Berry is a fantastic general manager. We're very fortunate to have him in Cleveland, and I'm glad that caller brought it up because a lot of times, like, we want to criticize, oh, well, he still didn't get this one guy. Look at his body of work and what he's done to make the roster better. Before he got here, look at the roster, what it was before he got here, and after he's taken over. Dramatic difference.
The moves that he makes seem to make sense. Now, they got to go out, but at least you can follow the line of thinking. If pay attention, you follow the line of thought be towards building that out. All right. What do you think about Sione Takitaki? What do you think happens with him?
I think it's going to come down to how he performs this year because obviously he's not going to be a starter for the Browns, but one thing you want, especially guys on one-year contracts, you want to see can they be a good rotational piece. And I do think he can do that. When he's on the field, he's a pretty solid player. There's nothing that he really does exceptionally well. He's just a solid all-around football player. And I think if he has a solid year this year, he's someone that, because right now he's making the veteran minimum as well with Anthony Walker. So I do think if he just does a solid job, you can look at $3 to $4 million, maybe on a 2-year deal. And I think he would stay here for that, because he's not a guy that unless he has a Pro Bowl type season, he's not going to go out and make above probably $5 million a year anywhere that I can really think of, unless a team overpays for him. So if Jim Schwartz likes his production this year, I can see him coming back and being re-signed by the Browns. The biggest question with him, unfortunately, along with Anthony Walker, is health. And I think that could be the reason that, let's say, Sione Takitaki has another injury this year. That's when I could see the team move on, unless he's willing to take, like this year, another veteran minimum contract. Then you bring him back. So he would make sense to re-sign because he would be cheap. And if he just does a solid job as a rotational player, you need guys like that on your roster. So if he can do that job, there's no reason to even to not bring him back, because you need guys like that on your team.
All right. If you feel good about the Rodney McLeod signing, take a look at this. You're going to feel even better with it. 62 games that he played in Philadelphia under Jim Schwartz. These are the numbers. Allowed a 59% completion percentage against, had 9 interceptions, 15 pass breakups, and allowed only 3 touchdowns. That's one of the reasons Jim Schwartz wanted Rodney McLeod. That shows you his level of understanding of the defense translates into production.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's just a stats from his time with Jim Schwartz. Not even to mention what he did last year with the Colts. I mean, he still posted an 80 grade this year, which was very good. His coverage grade was an 85.3. I mean, run defense 66.8. But I mean, when you're getting older like that, sometimes, I mean, that's bound to take a little bit of a dip. But he's still a productive football player. And the fact that you barely paid anything to add him to this roster, it's a huge addition for the Browns, because, again, you're not only bringing in someone familiar with Jim Schwartz and the system he runs, you're bringing in a guy who has that Super Bowl winning experience and that mentality to know what it takes to get to that next level. And I think that's very important, because he's going to be a voice in the locker room, even though it's only a 1-year contract and he could be gone after this year. He's going to be a leader of the defense because he already has that experience with Jim Schwartz. Also, he has been a captain in Philadelphia, and he's been a captain with the Colts. So he's very well respected around the league. Great addition for the Browns for Jim Schwartz. And I can't wait to see how many times Jim Schwartz likes to put these guys, all 3, on the field together at the same time this season with Rodney McLeod, Grant Delpit, and Juan Thornhill, because you have a lot of talent in that secondary, but you have so many guys that are versatile and can play slot corner, free safety, strong safety. Those 3 can play all of those positions. So Jim Schwartz is going to have all the flexibility in the world. And when you bring in a guy that's familiar with what he runs, it's very helpful for sure.
All right. This is from Fort Lauderdale. So Elijah Moore working out, and he is working out with Odell Beckham Jr., Zay Flowers, Jahan Dotson out in Fort Lauderdale. And, a couple of people kind of asked me, well, how do you feel about him working out with Ravens? And I like the fact that he's working out with guys that he can pick their brains to work on the craft of being a wide receiver. Don't look at him as working out with Ravens. Look at him as trying to get better by trying to pick up little things as a wide receiver.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too, Dave. I mean, go learn from some of the best wide receivers, because that's Odell Beckham. I mean, when he was in his prime, he was one of the best. Some would consider the best wide receiver in the league. And one thing that OBJ is still elite at is his route running. That has not changed, and his ability to separate. It might not be what it used to, but that's still something he's known for, and having that extra gear of speed. I have no problem with Elijah Moore doing that. I never have a problem with players working out with rival players. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, a lot of these guys are friends. It doesn't matter what team they play for. We're not 20, 30 years ago where, I mean, a lot of these rivalries, these players actually hate each other. There's a lot of respect around the league for players. And so for Elijah Moore to do that, I don't see that as a big deal at all. If anything, I like that he's working out with guys outside of the Browns. There's nothing wrong with that. Every player should do that. I mean, Deshaun Watson worked out with DeAndre Hopkins this offseason. DeAndre Hopkins is a free agent, and there's a good chance he's not going to join the Browns. They're friends, though, so he worked out with them. I mean, nothing wrong with that, and it's good to see Elijah Moore outside of just taking this kind of time as a vacation. Just shows how hard these guys are working, too.
Yeah, they're not sharing team secrets with him, trust me. They're going to want to beat him every bit as bad as they did before, maybe even more so, because they're going to have to hear it if they keep working out with him the following offseason. Tyler Johnson and I are going to step aside, take one more timeout. An interesting perspective. Current NFL players' chances of making the NFL, or the Hall of Fame, rather. We have a couple Browns on this list. Sports4CLE will be back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dawgs podcast, as well as Network 216. It's kind of interesting. This is from the 33rd team. Those are former NFL personnel executives and front office types. These are current NFL players' chances of making the NFL. There's locks, likely, and potential Hall of Famers. Joel Bitonio and Myles Garrett are listed as potential Hall of Famers on this list. And again, they'll probably just have to keep doing what they're doing for the next couple of years. I would also add Nick Chubb to this list. Derrick Henry has 2,000 more career rushing yards than Chubb and is listed as a likely Hall of Famer, which means, and he's played 2 more years than Chubb, which means Chubb needs to have a couple more typical Nick Chubb years, and then he will likely fall into the likely Hall of Famer category. It goes into longevity with all of them. But I think, as long as Myles Garrett has another 2-3 years like he's had, and I think he's probably good for even more than that. Same with Joel Bitonio. I think they probably are on track to make it to Canton in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I mean, you look at Myles Garrett last year, 16 sacks. The year before, 2021, 16 sacks. Right now in his career, he's got 74.5 sacks. He's already Browns leader in all-time sacks. I think in his career, he's going to have well over 100 sacks. He'll be in the Hall of Fame as he should be. I mean, he's talent-wise one of the most talented pass rushers in the NFL. You could make the argument the best pass rusher in the NFL. And Joel Bitonio. I mean, Joel Bitonio is consistently a Pro Bowler every year. He's been an All-Pro. Kind of reminds me of when the Browns drafted Joe Thomas. When they drafted Joe Thomas, they had a Hall of Fame left tackle, and now they might have a Hall of Fame left guard, which it's just remarkable to be able to do that. But then you bring up Nick Chubb. Yeah, I agree. I think Nick Chubb needs another 2 years like that, and it gets tough because obviously you get older with age. But the thing going in Nick Chubb's favor, you had Kareem Hunt these last 2 years to take not half the touches away, but probably about 25% of those touches that Nick Chubb would have gotten and carries away, which has preserved Nick Chubb's body. So I think he could have another 2 years like that, maybe even 3, and maybe he pulls an Adrian Peterson. I mean, there are not many Adrian Petersons, but maybe Nick Chubb does that and is able to prolong his career and play till he's 33, 34 years old, and then obviously solidify himself as a Hall of Famer. But Myles Garrett for sure, I think, will be a Hall of Famer. Joel Bitonio, and I think there's a good chance Nick Chubb could be as well. Yeah,
and playing in more of a spread-out offense could even help prolong his career, like you were talking about as well, with them throwing the ball with Deshaun Watson. All right, before I let you go, this also from the 33rd team. Most passionate fan bases. They go Steelers 1, Packers 2, Chiefs 3, Bills 4, Eagles, Saints, Cowboys, and then the Browns 9. And I don't have a problem with any of the fan bases that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, but I would say they've all been pretty consistent playoff teams, and we've been talking about the Browns have been to the playoffs one time. So I think if you're talking about passionate fan bases, look at when things aren't going well, and I think that's what separates the fan base of the Browns.
Exactly. I mean, the Browns, this fan base is more dedicated than I think a lot of NFL teams' fan bases because of what these fans and what we have gone through since the team has moved back to Cleveland. And like those other teams you mentioned, they're always winning. Like they've always been winning games. They've either won Super Bowls or they've been contending for Super Bowls, been consistent in the playoffs every year, having 10-win seasons. I mean, it makes sense that's why all those teams are up there. But the fact the Browns really until the last couple of years, even breaking out of the 0-16, 1-31 seasons, look at that turnaround the Browns have had even since then. And the Browns fan base has been through the most, but to me, they're the most dedicated fans in the entire NFL. And it's kind of hard not to be biased when it comes to seeing those rankings. But if the Browns start winning, I like consistently for the next 10, 20 years, they should be number one on that list. And quite frankly, to me, it wouldn't even be close.
Yeah, keep in mind, it wasn't too long ago that there was 0-16 followed by 1-15. So, again, when you're saying most passionate, everything is kind of relative to winning. It's easy to be passionate when you're winning. Browns fans have stuck around through some lean years. Tyler Johnson, as always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tyler.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Tyler Johnson, make sure you check him out, the Faithful Dogs podcast, as well as Network 216. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report, straight ahead. Stay with us on Sports4CLE. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to OhioLottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. Sports4CLE continues. We continue talking Browns. Let's welcome in Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Fred, as always, appreciate the time. Training camp, it's right around the corner. Give me some players that you're keeping an eye on that you think we should watch during training camp.
Well, I think, obviously the new guys, how they fit in. We've got a good look at some of them in the offseason program, but we haven't really seen how they're going to be used, and you don't see that until they put on the pads and they start, kind of hitting for real, even though that's not the same hitting that they do in the regular season. So with that said, I'm interested in seeing Zadarius Smith, at the top of the list, on defense, and Dalvin Tomlinson and Obo Okoronkwo, as well as some of the new guys, rookies, Siaka Ika, Juan Thornhill. Those are always, curious just because you haven't seen them. But you want to see how Jim Schwartz is going to attack this whole, situation with his defense. On offense, of course, you want to see Elijah Moore and Marquise Goodwin and, how they're going to use those guys, stretch the field, the new tight end, Jordan Akins. But more important, the bottom line is offensively, I think, is Deshaun Watson and how he looks. He's looked great in the offseason. Does he carry that over into the, training camp and preseason? And so, it starts for real here in about 2 weeks on the 22nd. So there's going to be, in my opinion, 21 of the 22 starting positions are pretty much already filled in. In fact, in the Browns' minds, they might think all of them are kind of filled in because I think Jordan Elliott's a question, but they had him at defensive tackle with the starters in the base defense, mostly in the offseason. So it just really, to me, it's battles for backup jobs and positions and, bottom end of the roster, because this roster, at least on paper, before any injuries, is loaded.
Yeah.
More loaded than I've ever covered.
I would agree with you. I kind of expect Jim Schwartz to try to set a tone right from the get-go with that defense. He has what in mind he wants that defense's identity to be, and we know it's aggressive and kind of nasty, and I have a feeling he's going to get after them pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw a little bit of that in the off-season program, but he's pretty intense. He's somebody that I've touted, since day one, the entire offseason, that I think that he is the biggest acquisition or change that they've made. They've added some great players, but I think his scheme and his mentality and his opening press conference, when he said in all the years he's been in the NFL, talking to quarterbacks, talking all of the NFL players, the most disruptive thing you can do is have a big-time pass rush. So that tells me that all attention is going to be on the pass rush. He's confident in the cornerbacks that they have, and I think that your cornerbacks look better when they only have to stay with their guy for 2-3 seconds, because you got guys barreling down on them from every angle. And I just think that if he's aggressive, even when Joe Woods got aggressive, the Browns had good results. He just didn't do it often enough, in my opinion.
What about some of the battles in training camp? You mentioned they're going to be for the back half, but who kind of intrigues you? Who do you think's fighting for a spot on that 53?
Well, as far as returning guys from last year's roster, I'd say top of the list would be, Jacob Phillips. As far as, here's a guy who, they could draft in the third round and really had high expectations last year. I think Joe Woods wanted to play a lot of two linebackers with JOK and Phillips, and his problem is he can't stay on the field. And then when he did get to play after Walker got hurt, obviously he got hurt, but before he got hurt, he really wasn't a run-stopping type guy. He's a little too slight. He's more athletic. And it will be interesting. This is the last year of his rookie contract. In the first 3 years, he hasn't been able to stay on the field. I tend to think that they will try to give him another opportunity because of his athleticism, because Barry likes him so much. But I don't know what Schwartz thinks about him. And there are some younger guys there. So at linebacker, I'd say you didn't really change much at linebacker, and 5 of them are coming off injured reserve. So you don't know where Anthony Walker really is. You don't know where Takitaki really is. Neither of them practice in the offseason. And then you got JOK and Kunasek and Jacob Phillips. So I say big battle there with Tony Fields to make the team. And then you have, like I said, defensive tackle. What are you going to do with Perry and Winfrey? Did they like him? Did he have just too many offseason incidents? I don't think so. I think they feel he can play, but he's going to have to battle. I think Tommy Togiai is going to be in for a tough preseason. I think he's going to have to show a lot, or he's not going to make the team with the guys they brought in. And, I could say the same maybe with a couple other positions, guys that have been on the team before. I think Anthony Schwartz on offense tops the list. I think the moves they made, bringing in 2 speed receivers, Marquise Goodwin and Elijah Moore, spelled the end for Schwartz, because what is he known for? Speed. He hasn't been able to stay on the field either. So when you look at this all the way around, I'd say those are probably the most well-known. There's going to be other surprises, but this is going to be the first time I think Andrew Berry's going to be forced to move away from his draft picks. I mean, the only draft guy he's taken in his 3 years, not counting 2023, obviously, is Richard LeCounte, I think, is the only one that he has parted ways with. So we'll see what happens. But there's just not room for all these guys. Demetric Felton's another one that's in a battle for the third running back spot. So we'll see what happens there.
All right, this is from CBS Sports, ranking the NFL's top 10 defensive position groups. Number 1, Eagles edge rushers. Number 2, 49ers interior defenders. 3, Ravens off-ball defenders. 4, Eagles cornerback. 5, Browns edge rushers. For years, Browns pass rush began and ended with Myles Garrett. Garrett finally has a complimentary edge rusher that can help him out in Zadarius Smith. Huge upgrade over what Jadeveon Clowney brought Cleveland a year ago. Fred, I know you've also written an article for the Orange and Brown Report looking at the edge rushers, Greetham's angle, expectations in 2023. Take us through what you expect the edge rushers for the Browns to be.
Well, I think it was one of the last signings. Rodney McLeod, the safety, and Zadarius Smith, the trade. I think the Smith one is the biggest move on free agency in the offseason or in trades as far as acquisitions of players. I think this is a guy who's been there, done it, and he's done it at a high level. In fact, there's a statistic that in the last 4 years, only 5 edge rushers have had double-digit sacks or more, and one of them's Myles Garrett, and the other one of the 5 is Zadarius Smith. The 1 year he didn't have double-digit, he was injured pretty much the whole year. I think he only played a game. But even last year when he was dinged up, he still had 10 sacks. So, like I said before, with an attacking, aggressive philosophy, you look at the edge rushers. The Browns had 34 sacks last year as a team, but 20 came from the edge rushers. Those are the guys usually that get the sack. So 20, okay. But one guy got 16 of the 20, or 80%, in Myles Garrett. So that tells you nobody helped him out, and he was getting double, triple teamed. You get a guy like Zadarius Smith, and don't forget Obo Okoronkwo. He was the free agent signing that we all thought was going to be, the guy opposite of Garrett. And now you have 3 guys coming at you. And I even saw in the mini camp, they had Zadarius Smith lining up with Okoronkwo and Garrett, all 3 of them at the same time. And I just think that the offenses they're playing against cannot block them all. If they choose to continue to double team Garrett, do you think Zadarius Smith isn't going to have a field day? Or Okoronkwo? I mean, I have to believe that the defensive line, if they can stay on the field, can just be outstanding. And so, 5th overall, yeah, I expect them to be at least 5th overall. I was surprised the Steelers aren't ranked higher than the Ravens. But as far as I like what the Browns have done there. And like I said, they got some cornerbacks. And if you get the pressure on the quarterback coming from everywhere, I think that spells good things happening, on the defense.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to your point earlier in the segment, Schwartz is a guy that, a little bit of pressure, he's just going to keep coming. He is not going to let up. Fred Greetham and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. We will continue talking Browns. A little bit of offense next on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham from the Orange and Brown Report, senior analyst. This from the USA Today. The case for and against each team going from worst to first in their division. This by USA Today. For the Browns, the case for. Few others on this list can claim the difference maker Cleveland has in Deshaun Watson. Offense has talent and stability to be one of the league's more productive units after years of pedestrian and subpar outputs. Defense should be invigorated by Jim Schwartz simplifying things. things. Case against. At this point, Watson's performance last season can't be completely written off as an aberration. If the Browns don't get elite quarterback play from Watson after going all in for him last March, there's no real springboard for this team to put itself in the same tier with the Bengals and the Ravens. Fred, I disagree with the point. If you truly sit back and take an objective look at how it was stacked against Deshaun Watson, 700 days off, hadn't played in Kevin Stefanski's system, hadn't played with the guys he was playing with. 11 weeks they were playing. He came in 11 weeks after sitting on the sideline. There was no way he was going to perform the way he looked when he was in Houston. But to their point, if they don't get, it doesn't have to be elite. It has to be above NFL average quarterback play. It could be a long year.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I've said this and I'll continue to say it's the most important, point for this season is the play of Deshaun Watson. But I disagree with that column as well. And I think for the Browns' sake, I think that they are going under the radar across the board nationally as a team that is, just a so-so team. I get that because based on the way Watson played last year, you mentioned, in addition to the 700 days off, there's a ramp up from game 1 to game 12, and every other player had played 11 weeks or 11 games, and he's just starting his season. So because he's getting $230 million at the time, I think he's the highest paid player, and then he becomes, obviously with the highest guaranteed, the expectations are even higher, and that's rightly so brought on, and a lot of it is the national perception because of the accusations, and rightly so, and brought on by him himself. So all that being said, think of a couple years ago, Baker Mayfield had an outstanding season, his best season. I think, the Browns went to playoffs. He threw 26 touchdowns and had 8 interceptions, and the Browns were 11-5, went to the playoffs. We know all that. Deshaun Watson, his last couple years in Houston would have set a Cleveland Browns franchise record in their history for touchdowns as well as passing yards and all those things. I think this year, and I don't think he's going to have necessarily his best year, but he doesn't have to. I think he'll break the franchise record set by Brian Sipe this season. But even if he doesn't, if he just played the way Mayfield did 2-3 years ago, I think this team has improved itself on defense. And I keep coming back to that, to what Jim Schwartz. This defense let the team down 2 years ago. When Baker Mayfield was injured and playing terribly, the defense couldn't hold leads, and they were giving up way too many points. Last year, they gave up 23 a game. If Jim Schwartz's defense can just get it to around 20 or less, I think they'll win games just on the defensive play, let alone, I think this offense will be able to score more than 20 points a game. But that's where I'm saying with the weapons and everything, that Deshaun Watson can just get the ball to the playmakers and not lose games for them. I think they can get to the playoffs. But yes, to win the playoffs, to get to the Super Bowl, he's going to have to be an elite player. And you have so many good quarterbacks in the AFC particularly. I just think you got to get into the playoffs, and then any given day, is Mahomes better that day than Watson? Is Burrow better that day than Watson? Is, you name it, Josh Allen, right down the list, Trevor Lawrence, whoever. There's so many good teams and good quarterbacks. It's really going to come down to any given, the any given Sunday type thing. But I think that, yes, I saw something the other day. Watson was listed as the 26th best quarterback in the NFL, like 2 spots ahead of Baker Mayfield. I'm like, okay, that's not what I've seen. And I'm not a homer. I watched practice. I've watched it for 30 years plus, hate to say, but he is better, at least on the field I've seen, more athletic, better thrower, than Brian Sipe and Bernie Kosar. And I know that might sound blasphemous, but I've seen them all practice and in games. Now, can he do it in the game and get back to where he was? Yes. If he shows a glimpse of what he did before 2020, I think you're going to have a lot of people pretty excited around here.
I agree with you. And to your point of just how big of a struggle it has been at the quarterback position for the Browns, take a look at this. Teams with the most quarterback turnover the last 10 years. The Browns are number 1 with 11 quarterbacks in 10 years. You see the breakdown. Mayfield started 59 games. Raise your hand if you had Brian Hoyer as the quarterback who started the second most, 1 game ahead of Deshaun Kaiser. Also on that list, the Texans and Rams had 10 quarterbacks. The Bears had 9. It just goes to show you, and again, the Rams won the championship with Matthew Stafford. That's why they gave up what they gave up. That's why the Browns gave up what they gave up to go get Deshaun Watson. You have to have a quarterback to win in the NFL these days.
Well, absolutely, and you mentioned it. That's why they were willing to go through everything they've gone through, and everything they went through last year. I don't think they exactly thought the suspension and the outrage was going to be as big as it was, but even if they did, it is something to withstand that pressure, and this is what they were willing to do it for. I mean, when you're a personnel guy and you give up 1 first-round pick, they gave up 3, and basically they gave up their draft for 3 years, not to mention all the money, all the ridicule and everything, losing the fans and everything across the country for this. And so it's all on the table, and it's all on Deshaun Watson, and I should say Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski has shown he can devise a plan and make a Baker Mayfield look pretty good. I've been on record saying that I never thought Baker was an elite quarterback. I wasn't a hater. I thought he was a starting NFL quarterback, but he wasn't elite. He was an above-average NFL starting quarterback. I don't even know if he's that anymore, but that's what I said over the years. But Watson, they're paying him to be elite, and he really needs to be elite for them to have a chance, to get where they want to go. So we'll see. But Ben Roethlisberger, all those years he was, the Steelers quarterback, they were pretty much in the playoffs every year, and they had like 1 quarterback for like 18 years. So that's what you have to have, is stability, so you can build around it.
All right, before we go to break, I found this really interesting. Bleacher Report ranking the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL of the 2023 season. They go Darius Slayton, number 1, Richie James, number 2, Khalif Raymond, number 3, George Pickens, number 4, Terry McLaurin, number 5, and Amari Cooper, number 6. Cooper has 595 catches and 55 touchdowns in his 8 years, 9 of them last season. Slayton, who they had number 1, 170 catches in 4 years. Richie James hasn't even caught 100 passes. Khalif Raymond has 114 in 6. George Pickens is only in his 2nd year. They say with a full offseason together, Watson and Cooper have the potential to develop elite chemistry this year. Cooper showed last year as top 15 receiver at worst, even with mediocre quarterback play. And the important thing to remember about Cooper last year, he had a core muscle injury when Deshaun Watson was back that obviously he didn't tell anybody about, but it was serious enough he had to have offseason surgery. The guy's a really good receiver that doesn't seem to get as much respect nationally as he should.
Yeah, and I think, like I'd say, it's kind of hard to say he's underrated. I mean, he was like the 6th overall pick or something like that with the Raiders, and he did get traded to the Cowboys and then traded to the Browns. But I think there's some things there is because he is very quiet, unassuming. It seems like the typical top receivers have more diva in them. He isn't like that. Very soft-spoken, very humble type of guy. But I think that injury factor was huge last year. If you're going to get surgery, that means there's something kind of significantly wrong. He played through it, and he still had good numbers. And I do think the speed factor with the more and the Goodwin acquisitions are huge because Cooper's more of a route runner, possession guy. If you can stretch the field and get a safety or a corner to have to go deep, underneath's going to open up even more. And Jacoby Brissett, he played well, but he's not an elite quarterback. I think that Deshaun Watson is known for being an accurate quarterback, and I think that with the weapons the Browns have, I think he can have another big year. But the biggest thing is just being healthy, and so I think they can really be, a fine duo. And that's one of the things why I was pushing for, back at the beginning of the offseason, trading for a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. They ended up trading for another guy I was for, Elijah Moore, and I think that's going to help all the way around. They've been able to be here all offseason and work together.
Fred Greetham and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, they rank the top head coaches in the NFL. Where'd Kevin Stefanski land? We'll tell you. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham from the Orange and Brown Report. This from CBS Sports. Ranking the NFL head coaches for 2023. Andy Reid 1, Kyle Shanahan 2, Bill Belichick 3, Sean McVay 4, John Harbaugh was 5. Kevin Stefanski checks in at number 20. Career record 26-24, playoffs 1-1, although the playoff win, Mike Prefer was the interim. Perfectly catered to Baker Mayfield and promising playoff debut run, but since then, things have gradually gone downhill. Stefanski's done it long enough to spark an offensive turnaround, but his trajectory depends almost entirely on a rebound by Deshaun Watson. Two things about that, Fred. There has not been a normal offseason for Kevin Stefanski, and that downhill trend that they're talking about, well, Baker Mayfield played with a tore-up, non-throwing labrum, and you had Jacoby Brissett, who you counted on to be your backup. So you basically played 2 seasons without a healthy quarterback. Having said that, you need to win in the NFL, I guess.
Yeah, and they put together a really good roster, but that just shows you the point of your starting quarterback. I mean, I think Jacoby Brissett had the best year of his career last year, but he still, is an average at best quarterback. I wouldn't call him elite, and I don't know if he's a starting quarterback. I think he's right where he's at. You got a 1-year deal for $8 million with Washington, and so with that said, I think the thing that's missed there is the Browns tried to win games in those first 11 last year, and then they had to change on a dime. Well, they could have stayed with Brissett, but you're not going to stay with Brissett when you got a guy who you paid $230 million and make the transition. Plus, you were 4-7. It wasn't like Brissett was lighting the world on fire, and so, that's where it is. This is a chance. No excuses. Stefanski's had all off season, a normal off season, and he's had Watson here the whole time. It's up to him to design a system that plays to his strengths. And there's no excuses. If they don't put up points and have a great offense with the weapons they have, that's on Stefanski as well as the players. So, yeah, I think that I don't know how you rank him. You rank him kind of in the middle of the pack because he's been average. You start out 11-5, go to the playoffs, and then you can go nowhere but down. He was coach of the year his first year. He's very organized. That might have helped with the COVID year, that maybe they were a little ahead of some of the other teams not knowing what they're going to do. But now the word's out on what they've done. Now he needs to switch it and with the weapons, the offensive scheme that he wants to run, it's going to be brand new. And it's time to spring it on the NFL and get off to a good start. And it's kind of on him. I don't know if he's on the hot seat. I think the organization likes him and they like Andrew Berry working together. But again, if they, with everything they've done and added, if they have another so-so season, I can see him moving on from him as well.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. As always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Fred.
All right, Dave, thank you.
Fred Greetham, make sure you check him out. Greetham's Angle. He is the senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Today marks the 76th anniversary of Larry Doby's breaking the color barrier in the American League with the Cleveland Indians. It was 11 weeks after Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Doby had to change positions from his normal second base to center field with the Indians, and the transition to the majors was a rough one for Larry and the Indians. Here is Doby's story about the early days with the Indians, as told by the words of Indians manager at the time, Lou Boudreau, Indians beat reporters, and Larry Doby himself.
Larry Doby is now a Cleveland Indian.
I brought him into the office and talked with him and told him what to expect, not only from the ball players, from opposition, but from the fans, because this was a great move by Vec. And I tried to talk with Doby what to expect and how to handle it, and then took him out to the clubhouse, and we called a meeting, and I introduced him individually to each player.
There was 3 or 4 ball players that didn't like the idea of having a black player on the club, and they showed their feelings.
It was a situation where kind of unpleasant, uncomfortable. You got the players lined up at the locker, and he'll say, this is John Jones, and you put your hand out and you get a shake, and then it's Lou Jones. Put your hand out, you don't get a shake, and that happens about 3 or 4 times, But that was a little strange. It was a little strange. I couldn't understand it. We walked out on the field, and I must have stood there for about possibly 5 or 10 minutes before Joe Gordon walked out and said, "Hey, kid, come on." So we warmed up, and I warmed up for him the rest of the year. And I thought it was a great gesture to him. I felt that was a little low point in my life.
Few players of the white Southern players resented him, but his champion was a guy named Joe Gordon, who was a second baseman, an older player and a leader of the team, and Joe helped him out a lot.
As the game starts, Doby takes a seat at the far end of the bench. It's the tradition if you're a rookie. By the top of the 7th inning, the Indians trailed the Sox 5-1. With 2 men on, Boudreau sends Doby into the game.
So Doby went to bat against a pitcher named Earl Harris. So here you had a man from a Jim Crow segregationist state pitching to the first black man in the American League on July 5, 1947. Doby struck out in his first at-bat in the Major League uniform, but the significance of it was not the strikeout.
People want to say, well, you were nervous, you had butterfly. There ain't no butterfly. I struck out. I struck out before in high school. I struck out in college. I struck out in the Negro League. So what's the difference?
While the significance of his actions may have been lost on the 22-year-old, they were not overlooked by call-and-post sports writer Cleveland Jackson. For Larry Doby, it took but a few short minutes to walk up to the plate. But for 13 million American Negroes, that simple action was the successful climax of a long uphill fight whose annals are like the saga of the race. But Larry Doby has more immediate concerns. All his life, he has played second base, and the Indians have a perennial all-star, Joe Gordon, at second.
The 47th season was the toughest I think I had during the entire time I was in the major leagues, simply because I came to a ball club and I had never sat the bench before in my life. So now I get to Cleveland, and I'm just playing second base for the Newark Eagles. So I'm going to play second base. But then I find that I'm not going to play second base because they had a fellow by the name of Joe Gordon, who was a great player.
Doby plays a mere 29 games during the rest of 1947. His batting average is a disheartening 156. It's a frustrating year, both on and off the field.
People, I think generally, You know, we're looking and saying, this guy, Doby, he's got to produce better than his white counterpart.
Being human, Larry had to be hurt by some of the reactions of the fans and the epithets he heard and other things.
The easiest part was the name call. The subtle nuances and the things such as having half of your teammates not talk to you, not speak to you, not want to room with you on the road, not eat with you afterwards.
It dawned on me that, you know, there's certain things you're going to have to endure, and all the adversities and the struggles you gotta take it. You gotta go through it. That was a little hard for me.
And Larry Doby rebounded in 1948 and helped win the World Series for the Indians, hit a famous home run. Interestingly enough, Doby, a 7-time All-Star during his career, and the 2 years that he played that the Indians made it to the World Series, 48 when they won it, 54 when they had the best record in baseball and got swept, he received Most Valuable Player Award votes. Larry Doby, number retired for the Cleveland Indians, and it is Larry Doby Day. Made his debut 76 years ago today. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.